Hi, I'm Jess, and I'm going to be reading Chapter 7. The climb to Grandma Josie was the hardest of all. The lights went on and off, and on and off, and then on and off again. And Ted had to rest on more than a few branches, which were getting shorter and thinner as he climbed. He had stopped looking down. It was a long way and made him feel a bit sick. He was just wondering if he would ever make it when he finally caught sight of Grandma Josie's silver sheen. Although not as old as Jake, she was getting on a bit, and her casing was tarnished and patchy in places. But she still reflected the Christmas tree lights as well as any younger bauble, sending them skitting around the walls and ceiling like little silver snowflakes. "Hi, Grandma Josie," called Ted, as he finally reached her branch. She was gazing upwards and hadn't seen him until he was right next to her. "Ted, how lovely to see you, dear," she welcomed him in her soft song-like voice. "It's such a wonderful night. You must come and stargaze with me." Ted hopped closer, and she clinked hangers with him. "What a brilliantly determined little bauble you are, getting so far up the tree. I bet you had found out all sorts of things, haven't you?" She smiled her Grandma Josie smile. It felt as it had done ever since he'd known her, like she was smiling from somewhere else, from a slightly different world to the rest of them. "Oh yes," said Ted quickly. "I found out about Mary, who carried a special baby, God's own son. Then there was Joseph. He had to trust God too, even when it didn't seem to make sense. The shepherds, they were waiting for a rescuer, and the special baby was it. And the 3 rich men, they came to worship the baby because he was a king, and they brought gifts, and one was myrrh, and I don't know." "Slow down a little, Ted," Grandma Josie smiled that smile. "You have found out many things, but you are only a little bauble. Not every answer is within your grasp. The best thing you can do, my wonderful Ted, is look up." Ted followed her gaze and immediately took a breath. He hadn't entirely been sure that the star would be worth the journey. But he was wrong. It was dazzling. Made of white folded paper, tiny little holes were cut into it in such a way that pinpricks of light shone through them, wrapping it in a delicate blanket of sparkles, like tiny dancing firefly flames. "Fa-la-la," breathed Ted, awestruck. "It's fantastic." Grandma Josie chuckled, and they sat there for a long moment, just looking. A very long moment. Just when Ted was trying to work out if Grandma Josie had actually fallen asleep, she turned and spoke softly. "The special baby's name is Jesus, Ted. He is the light of the world." "Is?" said Ted. "I thought this all happened many years ago. And when Monty said that myrrh was for funerals, I thought..." "Ah, Ted," Grandma Josie interrupted gently. "This baby grew up to bring light, and however much it tried, darkness could not overcome that light. You see, there is always so much more than we see at first. Are you looking up?" "Yes," said Ted. "I love the star, but..." "Look further up," said Grandma Josie. Ted looked. As he did, the star began to go fuzzy, and he focused past it, up through the skylight window that was in the ceiling above the tree, until he saw more pinpricks of light. They were so far away that they looked like dust on the window at first. But as he looked harder, they became brighter and brighter and more distinct, as if they themselves were. Stars, said Grandma Josie, leaning close to him so that her hanger gently touched his. You see, you mustn't be fooled by the donkey and the rough feeding trough. That baby was a king, is a king. And not just king over the earth, over the things we know. Oh no, Ted, he is king over everything we don't know too, over the whole universe, over time and space, over matter and unmatter, over hearts and souls and minds, and all the mysteries that ever were and ever will be, from the very biggest right down, wonderful Ted, to the very littlest. As Ted gazed at the stars in the vast night sky, he felt it all starting to slot into place. Mary and Joseph journeying to Bethlehem, the scruffy shepherds who were the first to be told the good news, the rich wise men who had read about the new king before he was even born, and the angels singing at the top of their lungs in praise of the God of the universe. But one thing was missing. Grandma Josie, what about the special baby? Well, Ted, she said, and Ted thought he caught the tiniest of winks. It is Christmas Eve. Said Ted dumbly. He was losing the thread again. What was Christmas Eve? But he didn't have time to ask, because suddenly the tree began to shake. Ted squeaked and looked around. A giant hand, the same hand that had grabbed him from the box so many light on and offs ago, plunged over his hanger into the branches below him. Ted dived down quickly into the needles and made sure he was attached to the branch, then looked for Grandma Josie. She seemed to be totally unaware and hadn't moved a millimetre. Grandma Josie, what's happening? Ted screamed, not knowing whether to stay hidden or rush out and grab her. The hand came out of the branches, holding the 3 wooden wise men, before disappearing with them far down below Ted's eye line. It's got the kings, whispered Ted, as loudly as he dared. Within seconds, the hand was back, rummaging in the lower branches. Ted couldn't bring himself to look at the arm and person it was attached to. It was too big for him to get his frightened little mind around. This time the hand emerged with the angels and disappeared again below the lower branches before going back for the shepherds. Grandma Josie just carried on, gazing at the stars, with that far-away smile on her face. Soon, all the wooden figures were taken. Ted sat very still for a long time, but when it looked like the terrifying hand wasn't going to return, he allowed himself to emerge. Christmas Eve, eh, Grandma Josie? He muttered, not quite quietly enough. You forgot to mention it would be quite so dangerous. When Grandma Josie, whose ears were better than she made out, only chuckled and clinked his hanger in reply. Ted handed her Monty's folded piece of paper from the cracker. Here you are, Grandma Josie. Monty said you'd enjoy this. I want to see where all those figures went. After all, I've come this far. Good for you, lovely Ted, said Grandma Josie, and smiled at him. Better be following that star then. Of course, he needed to be higher. Maybe then he could see below the bottom branches of the tree where the hand had put all the figures. He started to climb, hoisting himself up to the next thin branch, then the next. He knew lots about Christmas now, but he still needed the why. Why was it so important that they celebrated it? Why was he here? What was his part in it all? He grabbed the next branch, which bent under his weight, tiny as he was. He took a breath and hopped himself up. If only he could see below the branches. Maybe they were hiding the last clue he needed. Using all his energy, he finally pulled himself to the upright stem, the very tip of the tree that held the star itself, and hooked himself on. He leaned out. Nearly. He could nearly see. He leaned out some more, just a little further. His mum's words came flashing into his mind. We're baubles, we crack easily. Be careful. He pushed the words away and leaned further still. One more stretch. Ted's hanger lost its grip. As he fell, he heard Grandma Josie chuckling happily to herself. It had tinselitis.